It started on a day that was supposed to be ordinary, but nothing about it felt normal from the moment she stepped into that busy terminal. People rushed past, dragging suitcases, children pulling at their parents' arms, announcements echoing overhead, but for Tasha, every step felt heavier than the last. She was only 19, her hair tied back in a neat ponytail, her eyes sharp yet tired from juggling night classes, meetings, and endless work trips. She never told anyone at the airport who she really was. She liked to see how people treated her when they didn't know. Her last name was the one painted on half the plane sitting at those gates. She clutched her ticket tight. It was a first-class seat, not because she wanted to show off, but because it was hers by right. Her father had built the airline from scratch, and she'd grown up falling asleep on old leather seats and listening to pilots' stories. But none of that mattered when you looked like her, young, black, alone, dressed in jeans and a simple jacket that didn't scream money or power. She didn't care much about appearances, but sometimes she wondered if she should dot. As she waited by the gate, she noticed a pregnant woman struggling with her bags. Tasha didn't think twice. She moved closer, lifted the heaviest bag, and gave the woman her seat when she saw there was no space to rest. "It's okay," she'd said with that easy smile she inherited from her mother. "I'll stand for a bit." "You need this more than me." The woman looked at her with tears in her eyes. "Thank you." "You didn't have to." Tasha just shrugged. "People should help each other. That's how I was raised." Moments later, when boarding began, Tasha stepped forward, her ticket ready. She felt a tap on her shoulder. The pilot himself stood there, his crisp uniform sharp, his eyes scanning her up and down with something cold behind them. He didn't even ask her name before snatching the ticket from her hand. He glanced at it, then at her, then back at the paper like it couldn't possibly be real. "This is first class," he said slowly, each word dripping with doubt. "This is not for you people." For a second, Tasha felt every conversation she'd ever had with her father come rushing back, about patience, about picking battles, about not letting anger write your story for you. She opened her mouth to explain, to tell him to check the system, to call his supervisor, but he didn't wait. In front of passengers already boarding, the pilot ripped her ticket right down the middle, the sound louder than any engine roar she'd ever heard. It felt like something inside her tore too. A few people gasped. Someone pulled out a phone, maybe catching the moment as it happened, but most just looked away, pretending not to see. Like always, Tasha felt heat crawl up her neck. She wanted to yell, but her father's voice echoed again, "Not yet." She didn't fight when security stepped closer, asking her to step aside like she was causing trouble. She didn't say a word when the pilot turned his back, walking up the jet bridge like he'd won something. All she did was take a breath, steady and deep, like she'd done in boardrooms twice her age. Like she'd done when the bank laughed at her father's first loan application, like she'd done when people said no girl like her could run a company like his. But the moment wasn't over yet. Because behind her, the pregnant woman she'd helped was staring wide-eyed, her hands trembling as she reached into her purse. She pressed a small folded note into Tasha's palm and whispered, "Don't let them do this to you. You're bigger than this." Tasha didn't even get to read it yet. All she felt was the weight of it, not just paper, but hope, a reminder that kindness comes back when you least expect it. As the plane doors closed, the pilot looked out the window, eyes locking with hers for just a second. He didn't know. Not yet. He didn't know that the girl he'd humiliated at the gate was the one who signed his checks, the one who sat in meetings that decided which routes stayed open, who stayed hired, who got promoted. He didn't know she'd grown up watching every inch of this airline like it was stitched into her bones. Tasha didn't smile yet. She didn't shout or wave her power in anyone's face. She just stood there, that torn ticket in one hand, the crumpled note in the other, and felt something inside her settle. She knew she wouldn't have to yell, not when the truth was bigger than any uniform or badge. And when that plane landed, the pilot would find out exactly who she was the hard way. But what Tasha didn't see was that someone else was filming the whole thing. The clip would be online in minutes. The world would see a pilot tearing up a black girl's ticket like her seat, like her place, didn't exist. They'd ask questions he'd have no answers for. They'd see her calm, steady, unbroken. And they'd see that, sometimes. The smallest kindness, giving up a seat to someone who needs it, has a way of coming back to you folded up in a note that could change everything. Tasha opened the note, her hands still shaking. She read the words once, then again. And just as security asked her to leave, she looked up, a fire in her eyes that no one could put out. She wasn't going. Anywhere, not yet. Not when the real story was just about to begin. Tasha stood still for a moment longer, ignoring the whispers and the curious stares. She could feel the note between her fingers, the paper soft but the words inside holding a weight she couldn't shake. She didn't even care about the people staring at her now, all those folks pretending they hadn't seen the pilot rip up her ticket, like they didn't want to get involved. She understood it though. Most people stayed quiet to protect themselves. Tasha knew that lesson too well. But this was different. This was her airline. Her father's dream. And no one was going to take that from her, not today. She stepped back from the gate area as the flight attendants whispered among themselves. One of them, a young man with a name tag that read Luis, gave her an apologetic look. He hadn't said a word when the pilot tore her ticket, but now he seemed to want to. He kept glancing between her and the jet bridge, like he wanted to speak up but didn't know how. Tasha caught his eyes and gave him the smallest nod, just enough to let him know she'd seen him. She wouldn't forget who stood by and who didn't. She pulled her phone out, her thumb hovering over her contacts. There was one name she could call, her father's old friend, Mr. Monroe, who still worked on the executive board. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the note. Maybe it was the thought of doing this her own way, without running to anyone for help. Her father always told her, "You don't need to shout when you already own the building. Just turn on the lights and let people see who's really there." Tasha moved to an empty row of chairs, her bag slung across her knees. She unfolded the note finally, her eyes scanning the hurried handwriting. "Don't let them tell you who you are. You were kind when you didn't have to be. Remember that. Keep your seat. You earned it. They'll see." It didn't say much, but it said everything. It reminded her of her mother's voice, soft but sure, always telling her to never forget her worth. She thought back to the nights she'd stay up with her father, stacks of old flight logs spread out on the dining table. He'd let her sit on his lap as he drew out expansion plans on napkins and receipts. He always called her his co-pilot. She'd watched him get laughed out of bank offices when they saw his skin, his accent, the little girl holding his hand. She'd watched him sign the paperwork for his first plane, a creaky old propeller jet that barely made the run from Chicago to Atlanta. She'd watched him shake every pilot's hand, no matter their rank, no matter their background. People make this airline fly, Tash, not just metal and engines, people. And now here she was, the people who made it fly were tearing down what he built without knowing it was hers to begin with. She could feel a slow burn inside her chest, not the kind that made you lash out, but the kind that made you stand up taller. The kind that reminded you why you were here in the first place. Lise, the young attendant, suddenly appeared at her side. He knelt down a little so he wasn't towering over her. "Miss, I'm so sorry about what happened back there." I didn't know what to say. His voice trembled a bit.
Tasha studied him for a second, searching his eyes for the usual empty apology. But this wasn't that. He meant it. He looked scared.
He probably needed this job more than he needed trouble. She didn't want him to lose it because of her. "It's not your fault," she said, her tone calm. "But tell me something, does he do that to everyone?" Luis hesitated, glancing back over his shoulder at the plane's door, which was now shut tight. "No, well, not everyone. He picks people. I've seen him do it before, but never like that. He thinks no one can touch him." Tasha almost laughed at that, a cold, quiet laugh that made Luis flinch. "That's what they all think," she murmured. "Until someone does." Luis pulled a folded paper from his pocket, his hands shaking just a little. "Look, I shouldn't be doing this, but I printed this before they deleted it from the system." He handed her a copy of her ticket. Her name, the seat number. Everything was there, clear as day. He'd been watching. He'd cared enough to save proof. Tasha looked at him and nodded once, slipping the paper into her bag with the note. Thank you, Lise. What's your last name? She asked. He looked confused. Garcia. She gave him a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I won't forget that. She stood up, bag in hand. The security guard who had told her to wait was looking at her from across the hall. He didn't move to stop her this time. Maybe he'd heard something. Maybe he just didn't want any part of it anymore. Tasha took a deep breath and walked past him like she owned the floor, because she did. Every inch of this terminal had her father's fingerprints on it, every light, every polished floor tile. And if these people wanted to act like she didn't belong, she'd remind them one step at a time. Her phone buzzed as she passed the newsstand. A message from her assistant popped up. Are you okay? There's a video. It's spreading fast. She didn't even need to see it to know what it was. The rip, the pilot's sneer. Her calm face holding back a storm. She could almost picture the captions already. Pilot humiliates young black woman. Or ticket torn for looking wrong. She didn't want to be a headline. She wanted to run this airline the right way, with people who knew what it meant to care for every passenger. But maybe sometimes a headline was how you opened people's eyes. She moved toward the large windows facing the runway. She could see the plane now, taxiing slowly, the pilot hidden behind tinted glass. Did he feel good about himself now? Did he feel big, important? Tasha wondered how he'd react when the truth landed before he did. Because this wasn't just about her, this was about every passenger, like her who'd ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. She could see her father's reflection in the window, could almost hear him saying, if they can't see you, make them look. Behind her, the pregnant woman she'd given the seat to came hurrying up, a hand on her belly, her eyes wide. I just wanted to check on you. I didn't know they'd do that. I'm so sorry. Tasha turned, softening. For the first time since the ticket ripped. Don't be sorry. You did more for me than you know. She glanced at the woman's bag, saw the airline tag with her father's old logo on it, the one they'd just redesigned. But he'd kept it on some roots to remind everyone where they came from. The woman squeezed her hand. People need to see this. They need to see you. Tasha nodded, her eyes drifting back to the runway. They will. And when they do, maybe they'll think twice before they treat the next girl like she's invisible. The intercom overhead called for final boarding on another flight. Tasha looked at her own torn ticket one last time before slipping it into her bag next to Luce's printout and the note. She didn't know exactly what she'd do next, not yet. But she knew the story wasn't over. The pilot might think he'd won, that he'd put her in her place. But her place was never at the gate, begging for a seat. Her place was in the air, at the table, at the top where decisions were made. She felt the weight of all the people who'd come before her. Her father, her mother, every passenger who'd ever sat back in a cramped seat, hoping someone would see them. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for them too. And somewhere deep down she felt the thrill of what was coming next, the confrontation, the reckoning. She would stay calm. She would stay steady. And she would show him exactly who he'd tried to tear down. One headline, one seat. One story at a time. She slipped her phone back into her pocket, lifted her chin, and turned toward the exit. People still stared. Some looked away quickly when she caught their eyes. But others nodded at her, small gestures that said, we saw. We know. We're with you. And maybe that was enough for now. Maybe that was how you built something bigger than an airline. Maybe that was how you flew higher than they ever thought you could. She didn't say another word. She didn't need to. The truth was already on its way. Tasha stepped out of the terminal doors into the humid breeze that carried the distant roar of engines and the faint echo of the world that had just watched her moment go viral. Her phone kept buzzing, but she didn't rush to answer. Every new ping was a reminder that eyes were opening. Somewhere, someone was watching that clip for the third time, asking how a pilot could do something so shameless. But while strangers were sharing her story, Tasha knew the real conflict was just beginning. She couldn't afford to rely on internet sympathy alone. People moved on fast when it wasn't their fight. She sat down on a bench outside near the drop-off lane. pretending for a moment that she was just any other passenger waiting for a ride home, but her mind raced ahead, piecing together how deep this rot might go. She thought about the pilot's face, so casual in his cruelty, so sure she wouldn't push back. How many others had he done this to? How many stayed quiet because they needed to get home, because they didn't want to lose a job, because they were too tired to fight? The screen door behind her creaked open. Luis stepped out again, this time without his uniform hat, his hair sticking to his forehead. He sat beside her, nervous but trying to look brave. "They're already talking about it inside," he said. Quietly, eyes darting around like he half expected the pilot to burst through the door and shout him down. "They're saying you threatened him. That you didn't belong up there." Tasha almost laughed, but it came out as a soft scoff. Of course they would twist it. That was the oldest trick in the book, make the victim look like the threat. She turned to him. "And you, what did you say?" Lee swallowed hard. "That it was wrong, that you did have a ticket. Some of the crew, they know who you are, or they think they do. They're scared." She could feel the subplots forming around her like shifting pieces on a chessboard. The flight attendants who had kept quiet for years because they couldn't afford to lose their positions. The staff who'd seen too much but never spoken up. And now this kid, Luis Garcia, who had just made himself a target by handing her that slip of paper. He didn't know it yet, but he'd chosen a side. "You need to be careful," she told him. "You gave me that copy, they'll know." Luis shook his head. "It's too late, people saw me. I'm in it now." A black town car pulled up to the curb. The back window rolled down just enough for Tasha to see the familiar face inside. Mr. Monroe. He looked older than she remembered. His gray hair perfectly combed, his suit too crisp for this sticky afternoon. He didn't say a word, just tipped his chin, a signal that it was time to get in. Luis squeezed her shoulder before she stood up. "Don't forget us when you fix this," he said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of everyone who stayed. Behind those airport gates every day. Inside the car. The air smelled of leather and mint, a hum of the engine masking the buzz of her phone. Monroe watched her in the rearview mirror. "You ready for what comes next?" he asked, his voice low and careful. Tasha didn't look at him directly. She kept her eyes on the city rolling past, the glass towers downtown, the billboards with her father's airline logo flying high. "I was born ready. I just didn't think it would be like this." He handed her a folder from the seat beside him. "This isn't just about that pilot, you know. He's been protected for years, union connections, old guard. The people above him, they're nervous now. They're already trying to spin it, say you were trespassing, that you forged the ticket." Tasha snorted. "I own the system that prints those tickets. How do you forge what's yours?" Monroe cracked the slightest smile. "They're desperate. Desperate people do stupid things. And you're still young enough that they think they can paint you as reckless. They'll say you're unfit to run this airline, that your father's legacy is too big for you." Tasha flipped open the folder. Inside were old complaints, statements from crew members who'd tried to push back years ago. Most were buried or settled quietly, the paper trail leading nowhere clear. She saw names she didn't recognize, people who'd left the airline or been transferred far away to keep them quiet. The deeper she read, the more she realized that her father's vision had been chipped away bit by the same. People who toasted his name at board meetings. The people who smiled at her when she took over and said they'd stand by her. Her phone buzzed again. This time she picked up. Her assistant's voice was tense. "There's a reporter outside your office. She wants a statement. She says people are demanding to know if you're going to fire the pilot."
Tasha felt her pulse quicken. Fire him? Of course she could.
But this wasn't about a single man in uniform anymore. She could feel the roots running deeper, tangled in the very foundation of what her father built. Fire him, and they'd replace him with another just like him. Fixing this meant pulling out the roots, even if it hurt. "Tell her I'll speak soon," Tasha said. "No promises yet." She hung up before her assistant could protest. Monroe watched her carefully. "You know they'll come after you next. Dig through every file, every late flight, every complaint. They'll say you're too emotional. That you're a child playing dress-up in your father's seat. Tasha met his eyes in the mirror finally. Then let them dig. Let them see everything. I'm not hiding anymore. As the car slowed at a red light, she looked out at the people. Crossing the street, travelers dragging bags, kids with headphones on, mothers pushing strollers, a businessman shouting into his phone. They were her passengers. Her father had always said they were the real bosses. If they trusted her, no. Smear campaign could undo that. Somewhere on that plane midder, the pilot probably still felt untouchable. She wondered if he knew yet how quickly a seat could disappear when the person you humiliate owns the seat itself. She wondered how the crew would react when they found out the truth, when they realized the girl with the torn ticket was the same one who signed their paychecks every month. And then there was Luis. She couldn't stop thinking about him. A kid who'd risked everything to print out a slip of paper. She needed to make sure people like him weren't left to fend for themselves. Her father would have said, "Protect the ones who protect you." That she would do. The car turned toward her office building. The tall glass tower with her family's name in shining letters across the top. She thought she'd feel safe coming back here, but the knots in her stomach only tightened.
Inside.
Those walls were the same people who'd smile in meetings and whisper behind her back. The ones who said all the right things but turned their heads when things went wrong. She could almost see their faces already, the board members who would tell her to let it go, to protect the airline's image, to move on like nothing had happened. But they didn't know her like her father did. She wasn't the kind to let it go. The car rolled to a stop under the awning. Tasha stepped out, folder clutched tight under her arm, her phone still buzzing. Reporters were already gathering by the front door. A camera flash caught her eyes, but she didn't flinch. She straightened her jacket, smoothed her hair back, and stepped forward. She could feel the tension twisting tighter with every step. No one here knew exactly what she'd do next. But they were about to find out that the girl with the ripped ticket wasn't leaving quietly, and that the real turbulence was only just beginning. The lesson here is simple. Never judge someone by their color, clothes, or age. People who stay quiet often hold the most power. Tasha didn't fight with shouting or anger. She showed everyone that respect can't be torn up like a ticket. She helped someone first, and when it was her turn to be treated unfairly, she faced it with proof and calm strength. In life, when people try to put you down, you don't always have to shout. Sometimes you just need to show them who you really are. And always remember, kindness never goes to waste. A small good deed finds its way back to you when you least expect it.